Welcome back. South Africans are usually accused of being an angry nation, from violent protests to gender-based violence. The Melville drive-by shooting has left everyone in awe. 2 people were killed and 6 wounded, 2 of them critically. There was also a separate and apparently unrelated shooting at Mary Fitzgerald Square in Newtown. Reports say 11 people were wounded in that incident. Are we a violent society? To discuss this further, we're joined on the line by Pan-African Psychology Union President, Professor Saths Cooper. A very good morning to you, Prof, and thank you so very much for joining us here on the agenda.
Good morning to you, Flo.
As a start, this shooting that's happened in Melville and another one then in Mary Fitzgerald Square on the same day, it's put a lot of fear in quite a few of us here as South Africans. Does this speak to a bigger issue, and should we be very concerned about this? And I suppose what I'm asking, is the country facing an epidemic of violence?
Well, look, we are a violent society. We have been a violent society for decades. And all the indices show that that violence has not decreased. It is good that we are concerned when incidents like the Melville drive-by shooting happens and other dramatic killings happen, because it indicates that we still have the ability to be shocked by that violence, although we've become accustomed to it. In fact, a few generations of us have become accustomed to it. So I think it's good that we're taking note of it, and it's very important that the media actually focuses on this, because we should never, ever become accustomed or inured to the levels of violence that we have grown up with.
You mentioned the fact that we are a violent nation, and we have been for some time. What causes that? With a statement like that, the fact that we are violent, there has to have been some kind of a root cause to us being the violent nation that we are. What exactly is that root cause?
Well, look, we outside of the United States, we're the only democracy that has the levels of violence that we display. We hit the statistics as one of the most violent countries in the world. We have the highest rate of homicide in the world. We have, outside of war, outside of civil conflict, like in countries like El Salvador, Venezuela, Afghanistan, which has war, we are one of the most violent societies on earth. But it's masked, you see, because we have these cocoons of wealth and privilege, and we don't see the levels of violence that ordinary South Africans are subjected to on a daily basis. So, in fact, the spatial geography of apartheid has worked so well that we are shielded from it. But we are violent. The various statistics show that interpersonal violence, violence against intimate partners, we kill our children. So that's the kind of things that happen in our country. And part of it is because we haven't really reconciled in so many ways as a people. Economically, we still have those huge divides. We absolutely unequal in the world, and we have high levels of unemployment and poverty. And all of these ingredients are a ticking time bomb waiting to erupt, and we've seen this over time. We saw this in September last year. We see this every few months in some kind of outbreak, whether it's a standoff with the police or it's a community that is protesting, and that very quickly spirals into violence because we haven't had the ability to deal with ourselves and our anger and our frustration and the levels of actually dealing with the surplus population that the majority has become. And a few have benefited, and from the comfort of our homes, it's easy to blame criminals, but actually very few of us are unaffected by violence in this country. I would dare say all of us in some way are affected by violence. When you leave Auckland Park, you make sure that your doors are safely locked, and you know, it's that kind of thing. So we are a very violent society. The frustration, anger quickly turns to resentment against others when they are perceived as benefiting, when I, on the receiving end, am not.
Yeah. You know, you mentioned the United States briefly there in your response to my previous question. I mean, in America, there's quite a few, you know, these incidents are quite regular, I must say, actually. You know, we've seen a lot of these sort of mass shootings, particularly at schools. Is there a way to draw sort of parallels here in terms of, you know, what happens in the US and now what's happened here in South Africa, or should we perhaps step back from drawing those kinds of similarities?
Well, no, I think that the parallels are very stark. I wish that they weren't. We've learned the worst from the Americans. We carry arms. Our neighboring countries don't have you know, that right. If you go to Zimbabwe and you carry firearms, you'll be locked up straight away. So we need to look at that. And most of the homicides happen through violent death, and often weapons are used, and guns are a weapon of choice in this country. So we need to look at that, and more people arm themselves against other arms, and really nothing will give in such a situation. We need to actually have a policy where people are not carrying arms, because if you go to a fun event, why should you be armed? The police ought to be doing their jobs, but then the police themselves are guarded by private security firms, which is also part of the hype. You drive anywhere in the country, lower middle class and up suburbs, people have security. Another myth. It's you know, we just fuel it with denialism. We're not dealing with the root cause, and that's inequality. The fact that the majority of people in our society have been declared surplus, and we are not looking at how they can be part of the processes. They're far removed from everything that is happening, and so when something happens, you know, in a community, in a little village, in a little shack settlement, things spiral out of control. We actually have, we have 40% of our people living in shacks in the urban areas in our country. Surely that is unsustainable. We ought to understand that our castles built on the hill, surrounded by shacks, pose a danger. You know, it's untenable, it's unsustainable, and the sooner we begin to deal realistically with this, change our ways of dealing with each other, learning other means of conflict resolution, mediate that, the anger, the issues of separation, distance from economic and social power, the sooner will we be in the 26th year of our democracy a safer place.
Prof, you know, when incidents like these happen, debate automatically starts about, you know, whether it be about gun control or the death penalty being brought back. How much of these debates, which I'm sure you'll see over the next couple of days, are based on emotion rather than actual sort of reason or evidence of deterrence of crime?
Well, that's the important part you're raising, Flo. It's not based on the evidence, and our discussion now focuses on a lot of the facts surrounding the situation. And it's not merely in the 25 plus years of democracy. We've inherited a very deeply divided and violent society from our past. And merely because the giants of the Mandela strode that stage 26 years ago doesn't mean that we reconciled ourselves. We're deeply divided. The gaps are huge. They're almost insurmountable. More and more of the ultra-wealthy are ferreting their wealth somewhere else. They're not investing locally. Others are. So we're not dealing with the issues we ought to be dealing with. We're looking at symptomatic relief. We're not looking at the root causes. The sooner we begin to look at what is it that is making our country very insecure and uncertain, the sooner will we be to resolving the situation.
Yeah, you talk about the root cause, but usually when we see a crime of this magnitude happening, whether even if it's something like a rape, whenever you speak to family members, let's say, of the perpetrators, it's always a case of, they didn't see this happening. Why didn't they see it happening? This person is not is not a criminal. We hear all kinds of sort of excuses for the perpetrator of violence. Can psychological science step in and put, the pieces together of this unsolved sort of puzzle? Because it's always a sort of surprise to those around the perpetrators. And in some instances, you find these people didn't have, a bad upbringing, but they still get into the cycle of crime and criminal activity.
Well, there, but for the grace of an occasion, a spark, go any of us. All of us are capable of that violence that we find abhorrent and that we find surprising. Given the circumstances, I don't know how I would react if somebody walked in and began to attack or rape my daughter or some other undefended person in the household. So, it's something where we don't know the levels to which we would go to survive and protect those that are close to us. But having said that, that's a natural response. The abnormality of living with locked doors, of not being able to walk to the store around the corner except in shack settlements and in poor, very poor neighborhoods, is one that we have to address. The fact that we do not have visible police and inadequate police. For crying out loud, we've got graduates who are unemployed. Why are we not employing them to detect and prevent crime? We have huge crime intelligence agencies. They seem to be fighting factional and political battles instead of being used to combat the types of crime which we're talking about that happened in Melville. Drive-by shooting is gang-related. It is very thought out. It is planned by a group, an organized criminal gang-related kind of group to go and kill somebody for some reason or the other. And the history of this in the US, in Italy, in war zones tells us that it's planned. It's not incidental. It's unlike somebody just pulling out a gun and shooting somebody because you see them as a threat. But then, too, should we be armed to the level we are? Why do we allow ourselves to be armed thinking that we are safe when actually it isn't? Guns do kill people. We need to deconstruct from that mentality and look for other methods of dealing with ourselves, not using weapons that can kill.
All right, Prof. Cooper, let's leave it there. Thank you so much for your insightful analysis, as always. That's the Pan-African Psychology Union President, Professor Saths Cooper, weighing in on the violent incidents that we saw over New Year's Eve celebrations, in particular the Melville shooting and one that took place at Mary Fitzgerald Square, apparently unrelated, but just a look into the psychological aspects behind mass shootings and killings. That's Prof. Saths Cooper.